The sacred world and the human intruder. The sky of Xiara was always peaceful. Twin moons hung over the silver forests, and golden rivers flowed like gentle whispers through the land. It was a world untouched by war, greed, or corruption, a place of purity. The Velari, an ancient race of sacred beings, had lived in harmony for thousands of years. They followed one strict law. No outsider must ever set foot on Xiara. But that night, something broke the silence. A roaring fireball tore through the sky, crashing deep into the sacred lands. Trees burned, animals fled, and the Velari priests watched in shock. It was something they had never seen before. A metal machine, broken and smoking, lying in the middle of their untouched world. Inside, a man groaned. His body ached from the crash, but he was alive. Captain Daniel Kane, a human pilot from the United Earth Fleet, had survived. His ship had malfunctioned, sending him into a blind jump through space. Now he was stranded on an unknown planet. As he pulled himself out of the wreckage, he looked around in amazement. The air smelled fresh, unlike any world he had known. Trees shimmered with silver leaves, and glowing creatures moved silently in the distance, but something felt strange. Then he heard them. A group of tall, elegant figures in white robes emerged from the trees. Their skin shimmered like pearls, their violet eyes glowing with wisdom. They held no weapons, but their presence carried power. The leader, Sister Elith, stepped forward. "You are not welcome here, outsider," she said, her voice calm but firm. Daniel raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I didn't come here on purpose. My ship crashed. I just need help." Elith's gaze did not soften. "No one comes to Xiara. It is forbidden." The other Velari whispered among themselves. Some looked at Daniel with curiosity, others with fear. No outsider had ever set foot on their world. One of the elders, High Priestess Soraya, spoke next. "He is human. His kind are destroyers. If we allow him to stay, he will poison our purity." Daniel frowned. "I'm not here to destroy anything." Elith studied him. Something about him was different. She had always been taught that humans were violent, selfish, and corrupt. But this one looked lost and desperate. She felt something strange in her heart, a feeling she had never known before. But before she could speak, a loud beeping noise came from Daniel's wrist device. His emergency signal was still broadcasting, and someone had answered. A deep, robotic voice echoed through the device. "Unknown vessel detected. Preparing to engage." Daniel's face paled. "Raiders." Elith noticed the fear in his eyes. "What is it?" Daniel turned to her, urgency in his voice. "You need to listen to me. If they found my signal, they're coming." The Velari priests looked at one another in confusion. "Who is coming?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Pirates. Slavers. They hunt for untouched planets like this. They won't leave peacefully." The elders did not believe him. "Our world is hidden. No one can harm us," said High Priestess Soraya. Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand. These people don't follow rules. If they know you exist, they will take everything." Elith could see he wasn't lying, but she also knew her people would never accept an outsider's warning. Then the sky flashed red. A fleet of dark, metallic ships appeared above Xiara, blocking the moons. Shadows fell over the sacred land. The Velari, who had never seen war, watched in frozen terror. A voice, cold and merciless, echoed from the sky. "Surrender your world, or burn." Elith's heart pounded. The priests turned to their high priestess for guidance. But for the first time in 1,000 years, even the high priestess had no answer. And Daniel, he had only one thought. They don't know how to fight. They don't know what's coming. If they don't let me help, they won't survive. A forbidden connection. The night sky over Xiara had never known fear, until now. The raider fleet hovered like a monstrous storm, blocking out the twin moons. Shadows stretched over the sacred lands, swallowing the silver forests and golden rivers in darkness. The Velari, a race untouched by violence, stood frozen, staring at the sky in silent terror. Their world had never seen an invader, never felt the touch of war. The idea of conflict was as foreign as the humans standing before them. Daniel Kane clenched his fists. He had seen what came next. He had witnessed planets burn under the hands of men who saw peace as weakness. The Velari didn't understand. They thought purity made them untouchable. But he knew better. The raiders had already marked Xiara as prey. A deep metallic voice echoed from the sky. "Surrender your world or burn with it." A tremor passed through the gathered Velari. High Priestess Soraya, their leader, stood firm, her violet eyes cold. She turned to the human's only voice. "You have brought this danger upon us, outsider." Daniel exhaled sharply. "I didn't bring them here. They were always coming. The second my signal went out, they saw a chance to take an untouched world for themselves." Elith stood beside the priestess, her long white robes flowing in the wind. Her gaze flickered between Daniel and the raider ships above. Everything in her life had been clear until now. Purity was protection. Isolation was strength. But something inside her whispered, "This human is right." She swallowed, then took a step forward. "What do they want?" Daniel looked at her, surprised that she was the first to ask. "Slaves, resources, technology. Some raiders strip planets for fuel. Others just want to break something beautiful. Either way, if you surrender, they won't stop." A younger priest, eyes wide with fear, whispered, "But we are not warriors." Soraya lifted her chin. "Our people have survived for thousands of years without conflict. We will not break that peace now." Daniel gritted his teeth. "They don't understand." He turned to Elith. "If you let them land, they will take everything from you. You need to let me help." Soraya's voice cut through the air. "You are not one of us. You do not belong here. You will not pollute our ways with your violence." The words struck deeper than Daniel expected. He had been called an outsider on 100 different worlds. It never mattered. He fought his battles alone. He didn't need their trust. But something about Elith's eyes, the hesitation in her stance, made him want to fight harder. A new voice interrupted the tension. One of the Velari warriors, though warrior was hardly the right word, more like a temple guardian who had never lifted a blade in war. "We should hear him out." Gasps rippled through the sacred ground. Velari never questioned their high priestess. Soraya's lips pressed into a thin line. "We will discuss this. For now, take him into custody." Before Daniel could react, golden chains of energy wrapped around his wrists, binding his arms to his sides. He didn't fight. Not yet. 2 Velari guards led him through the sacred city of Lurvelen, a place of smooth white stone and floating gardens. The streets were empty. Word had already spread, and the people hid in their temples, whispering prayers. Daniel was taken to a chamber of light, its walls glowing like the inside of a star. The chains fell away, but the door remained sealed. Minutes passed, then an hour. He stared at the ceiling, knowing every second wasted was a second the raiders used to prepare. Then, the door slid open without a sound. Elith stepped inside, her white robes almost glowing. She stood there, watching him for a moment, as if unsure of her own presence. Daniel sat up. "So, what's the verdict? You gonna let them walk all over you?" Her hands curled into fists. "We do not fight." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Not fighting doesn't mean they'll spare you." Elith took a slow breath. "You ask us to abandon everything we believe in." "No." He stood up, stepping closer. "I'm asking you to survive." Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Elith looked uncertain. She had spent her life untouched by fear, untouched by war. But now, she could feel it. Daniel saw the struggle in her eyes. He softened his voice. "I get it. I really do. You've never had to fight. But tell me something, Elith. If you had the power to save your people, would you? Her breath hitched. I do not have power. Daniel shook his head. That's where you're wrong. Another pause. Then a soft peep echoed in the room. Daniel checked his wrist device, and his heart stopped. They're moving. The raiders. They're sending drop ships now. Elith's lips parted slightly, fear flickering in her gaze. Daniel clenched his fists. If your people don't make a choice, the raiders will make it for you. She turned to leave, but before stepping out, she said, I do not know what I believe anymore. The door shut behind her. Daniel exhaled, eyes burning with frustration. She wants to help. I know she does, but will she do it before it's too late? Outside, the sky burned with incoming ships. The human warrior versus the untouched world. The night over Xiara was no longer peaceful. From the horizon, fiery streaks tore through the dark sky. Raider dropships, descending like predators preparing for the kill. They weren't waiting for an answer. They were coming. Inside the sacred temple of Lurvelen, Daniel Kane watched from a high balcony, his jaw tightening. They should have listened. The Valeri still believed their purity would protect them. He knew better. The door behind him slid open. He turned to see Elith, her silver eyes shadowed with hesitation. They are landing, she said softly. Daniel crossed his arms. Told you they wouldn't wait. Elith stepped closer, staring at the raiders' ships in the distance. She had spent her life believing the Valeri's isolation made them safe. Now she could feel the cold truth settling in her chest. They were not safe. The council still believes we can negotiate. Daniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Of course they do. They won't listen, Elith. They'll pretend they have control until it's too late. She hesitated. There has never been war on Xiara. There has never been violence. If we change now, are we not destroying what we are? Daniel's voice was firm. You're not changing your people. You're protecting them. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Elith turned, her voice quieter. Teach me. Daniel blinked. What? I want to understand, she said, her hands clenched at her sides. If you are right, if they will not leave peacefully, then I must learn what it means to fight. Daniel studied her face. She was afraid, but not of him. She was afraid of the truth. A part of him wanted to tell her to run, to leave before she got caught up in something she wasn't ready for. But that was the problem. She wasn't ready. None of them were. And if she was the only one willing to learn, then he would teach her. Fine, he said, nodding. But this isn't just about swinging a weapon. If you want to fight, you have to be willing to do what's necessary. Elith's gaze hardened. Then show me. The first lesson. They stood in an open courtyard beneath Chiara's twin moons. The sacred city lay quiet around them, its people still convinced peace would save them. Daniel placed a small metal blade in Elith's hand. She held it awkwardly, her fingers unsure. Weapons are forbidden in our temples, she murmured. Not anymore, Daniel said. If you want to survive, you need to understand one thing. Violence isn't about anger. It's about control. He stepped closer, adjusting her grip on the knife. Right now, you're holding it like it's going to bite you. She exhaled, trying to focus. This is wrong. This is wrong. The words echoed in her mind, yet deep in her heart, something else whispered. But it is necessary. Daniel took a step back. Attack me. Elith's eyes widened. What? You heard me. She hesitated, then lunged forward in a quick movement. Daniel sidestepped easily, catching her wrist and twisting it just enough to make her drop the blade. Elith gasped, more surprised than hurt. Daniel let go. Again. She picked up the knife, frustration flickering across her face. She moved again, faster this time, but Daniel blocked her without effort. Over and over, she tried. Over and over, she failed. Finally, breathing hard, she stepped back. You expect me to fight when I cannot even land a strike. Daniel folded his arms. You're learning." Elith let out a slow breath. Her mind was still tangled between fear and purpose. "I do not think I can be like you," she admitted. Daniel's voice softened. "You don't have to be like me. You just have to survive." The raiders make their move. Just before dawn, the first attack came. Vaylari temple guards, unarmed and dressed in ceremonial robes, approached the raiders with open hands, hoping for peace. They were cut down within seconds. Screams echoed through the city. The illusion of safety shattered. Daniel and Elith stood on the temple balcony, watching as Vaylari civilians fled in panic while armed raiders marched through the streets, weapons drawn. Elith's hands trembled. They did not even listen. "They never do," Daniel said grimly. He grabbed a pulse rifle from the fallen wreckage of his ship. "It's time to make a choice." Elith turned to him, something different in her eyes now. The hesitation was still there, but beneath it was determination. "Tell me what to do." Daniel checked the charge on his weapon. "We stopped them before they reached the temple. Your people need time to escape." Elith's heart pounded. She had never killed, never even considered it. But as she looked at the raiders tearing through her city, she realized this was not destruction. This was protection. She picked up the small blade Daniel had given her. And for the first time in her life, Elith prepared to fight. The betrayal and the attack. The sky over Kiara was painted with fire. The once pristine world of the Vaylari, a place of harmony, untouched by war, was now a battleground. Smoke curled into the air as raider dropships landed across the sacred city of Lurvelen. The streets, once quiet with whispered prayers, now echoed with the sound of marching boots and terrified screams. Elith gripped the small blade Daniel had given her. The cold metal felt foreign in her hands. Her heart pounded. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had never fought before. She had never even thought of fighting. But now, as she watched the raiders cut down unarmed Vaylari priests, she knew there was no other choice. Behind her, Daniel loaded his pulse rifle, his expression grim. He had seen this before, too many times. Peaceful people who thought they could reason with monsters. It never ended well. Elith turned to him, her silver eyes burning with something new. "What do we do?" Daniel scanned the battlefield below. "We stop them before they reach the inner temple. If they take that, your people have nowhere left to run." She hesitated. "I am not ready." Daniel met her gaze. "No one ever is." Then, without another word, he lifted his rifle and fired. The first kill. The pulse blast hit the nearest raider square in the chest, sending him sprawling. The other raiders turned instantly, their weapons locking onto the temple balcony. "Take them down." One of them snarled, raising his plasma cannon. Daniel grabbed Elith and pulled her behind a pillar just as a burst of red energy shattered the stone beside them. She gasped, her body pressing against his as dust rained down. Her whole world had been peace, order, balance. Now it was chaos, heat, destruction. Daniel fired back, quick and precise, taking down 2 more raiders. "Stay behind cover. Don't hesitate." Elith clutched her blade, her hands trembling. Then she saw a raider charging toward a fallen Vaylari priest, his weapon raised to strike. Without thinking, she moved. She stepped out of cover and threw the knife. The blade sank into the raider's arm, not fatal, but enough to make him drop his weapon with a sharp cry of pain. Daniel saw the look in Elith's eyes, shock, fear, but no regret. "You just saved someone," he said. Elith stared at her trembling hands. I do not know how to feel." Daniel pulled her back into cover. "Feel later. Survive now." The council's betrayal. As the battle raged, the temple's inner chambers remained untouched. Inside, the Vaylari High Council gathered, their golden robes flowing as they whispered among themselves. Unlike their people, they had not witnessed the slaughter firsthand. They had only heard the screams. High Priestess Soraya stood at the head of the room, her expression unreadable. "These invaders are savages. One elder said, his voice trembling. "We must negotiate before more of our people die." Another priest scoffed. "They have already killed many. Negotiation is impossible." Soraya closed her eyes, then turned to a hooded figure standing in the shadows. "Is it done?" she asked. The figure nodded. "The message has been sent. The raiders have agreed to spare the council, if we give them what they seek." A ripple of unease spread through the room. "You mean to sacrifice our own people?" one priest whispered in horror. Soraya's gaze did not waver. "I mean to preserve our culture. If we must pay a price to remain untouched, so be it." Elith's discovery. Daniel and Ilith fought their way through the temple corridors, trying to reach the council before it was too late. The Velari warriors who had once followed the council's wisdom now looked to Elith and Daniel for guidance. For the first time in their history, they fought. They moved like shadows through the sacred halls, dispatching raiders quickly and silently. But Elith's heart pounded for another reason. Something felt wrong. As they neared the council chamber, she grabbed Daniel's arm. "Something is not right." Daniel glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "The council should have sent reinforcements. They should be defending the temple with us." Realization dawned on Daniel's face. His grip on his rifle tightened. They made a deal. A deep, booming voice echoed through the chamber ahead. "We accept your offer, High Priestess. Your people will make fine workers." Elith's blood ran cold. She pushed forward, throwing the heavy doors open. Inside, Soraya stood before a tall raider captain, a monstrous figure clad in dark armor, his reptilian eyes gleaming. Elith's voice was sharp with disbelief. "What have you done?" Soraya turned slowly, her expression calm. "I have ensured our survival." Daniel raised his rifle. "You handed them over." The raider captain chuckled. "The deal is simple. The Velari will serve, and in return, we do not burn your world to the ground." Elith's hands shook with rage. She had devoted her life to the council, believed in their wisdom. And now, they were selling their own people like cattle. "No," she whispered. "This is not survival. This is surrender." Soraya's voice was cold. "Then you are no longer Velari." Daniel saw the flash of pain in Elith's eyes, but it was gone in an instant. She straightened. Her voice did not waver. "Neither are you." She turned to Daniel. "Tell me what to do." Daniel gave her a grim nod. "We fight. The battle for the temple." The raider captain sneered. "Foolish." He lifted his weapon. Daniel fired first. The pulse blast hit the captain's shoulder armor, sending him stumbling back. The chamber erupted into chaos. Elith moved without hesitation, knocking down a guard with a well-placed strike. The Velari warriors stormed the room, weapons finally drawn. Soraya tried to flee, but Elith blocked her path. "You betrayed us." The High Priestess raised her chin. "You are the one who has abandoned our ways." Elith stared at the woman she had once worshipped. Then, with quiet certainty, she whispered, "No, I have saved them." Then she turned and ran toward the fight. Elith breaks the rules. The sacred temple of Lurvelen burned. The battle inside the council chamber had been swift, brutal, and unforgiving. The once pristine white marble floors were now stained with blood, some human, some Velari, and some belonging to the monstrous raiders who had underestimated their prey. Elith stood amid the chaos, her chest rising and falling rapidly. In her trembling hand, she held a bloody blade, the same one Daniel had given her. It no longer felt foreign. The world had changed. She had changed. Behind her, the body of High Priestess Soraya lay motionless, her once commanding presence reduced to silence. Elith had not killed her, but she had chosen her side. For the first time in her life, she had defied the council. She had chosen war over peace, and she did not regret it. The cost of survival. Daniel stood beside Elith, his pulse rifle still smoking from the last shot. The remaining Velari warriors gathered behind them, their robes torn, their hands now gripping weapons instead of prayer scrolls. "The council is broken," one of them murmured. "What do we do now?" Elith swallowed hard. The answer should have been simple. The Valyri had always looked to the council for guidance. But now, they looked to her. Daniel glanced at Elith, recognizing the weight of the moment. She had never been a leader before. She had never even imagined being one. But this war did not care for tradition. It did not wait for her to be ready. She turned to face them, gripping the blade tighter. "We fight." A murmur spread through the group. "We fight." The words felt strange on their tongues, yet they did not reject them. A deep explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Dust and stone rained from the ceiling. Daniel checked his wrist device. "The raiders are bringing in reinforcements. They're gonna hit us hard." Elith's mind raced. "Can we evacuate?" Daniel shook his head. "The raiders won't let anyone leave. If they take this temple, they control Kshara." Elith exhaled sharply. They needed an advantage. Then she remembered. "The forbidden vaults beneath the temple," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Forbidden vaults?" Elith hesitated. "There are ancient weapons, artifacts from a time before the Valyri chose peace. They have been sealed for centuries." Daniel's face darkened. "And your people refused to use them. They feared them." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "Well, looks like it's time to be afraid." Breaking the seal. The entrance to the vaults was deep within the temple, a place even Elith had only seen once as a child. The doors were engraved with ancient symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. The Valyri elders had hidden their past, burying their weapons in stone, hoping they would never be needed again. Elith stepped forward and placed her hands on the door. The ancient energy surged beneath her fingertips, recognizing her as one of the last priestesses. A deep rumbling filled the air. The doors unlocked. Inside, rows of forgotten weapons lined the walls, staffs humming with power, crystalline blades pulsing with energy, and suits of armor forged in a time before peace ruled Kshara. The warriors behind Elith stared in awe and fear. One of them whispered, "We were never meant to use these." Daniel stepped past them and picked up a Valyri energy rifle, inspecting it with a smirk. "Well, lucky for you, I don't believe in destiny." He tossed the weapon to Elith. She hesitated, then gripped it. It felt natural. She turned to her people. "The council told us we must remain untouched. But if we do not fight, we will not remain at all." For the first time, no one argued. The final stand begins. The raiders were already storming the upper levels of the temple when Elith and her warriors returned, now armed with the weapons of their ancestors. The invaders expected a weak, passive people. They did not expect the Valyri to fight back. The first wave of raiders charged forward, their armor gleaming under the temple's golden light. Elith lifted her weapon, feeling the energy hum in her hands. She pulled the trigger. A pulse of golden light erupted from the rifle, striking the lead raider square in the chest. He collapsed with a cry. The battle was on. Daniel fought beside her, his movements precise, controlled, the actions of a man who had survived too many wars. But Elith was different. She did not fight with hatred or rage. She fought with purpose. More Valyri warriors joined the fray, the air ringing with the sounds of their once forbidden weapons. The battle stretched across the temple grounds, the tide *** shifting for the first. The last stand of Kshara. The night sky burned. Kshara, the untouched world, was now a battlefield. Smoke and fire choked the once pristine air as explosions rattled the sacred city of Lurvelin. The golden rivers, once symbols of purity, now reflected only destruction. But for the first time in their history, the Valyri fought. They were not warriors, not yet, but they were survivors. And they would not fall without a fight. The unseen strength of the Valyri. Elith had never been in battle before. She had spent her life learning about balance, harmony, and the pursuit of peace. She had prayed in silent temples, meditated beneath the twin moons, and recited the old texts that spoke of purity as the only way forward. But now she understood the truth. Purity was not survival. She stood at the front lines, her once white robes now streaked with soot and blood. The Vaylari energy rifle in her hands pulsed with a golden glow. It had been buried for centuries beneath the temple vaults, a relic of a forgotten time. A time when the Vaylari had fought back. A raider rushed toward her, his blade gleaming under the firelit sky. Aelith did not hesitate. She raised the rifle and fired. A pulse of golden energy struck the raider in the chest. He collapsed with a cry, his weapon clattering to the ground. Aelith exhaled, gripping the rifle tighter. This is who I am now. Daniel's final stand. Daniel Cain had fought in 100 battles. But this one felt different. He had always been an outsider, a soldier with no home, no people to fight for. But here, standing beside Aelith and the Vaylari, something inside him felt right. The raiders were relentless. They had the numbers. They had the firepower. But they did not expect resistance. And they did not expect him. Daniel moved through the chaos like a shadow, weaving between cover, firing with deadly precision. His pulse rifle hummed with each shot, cutting down raiders before they could regroup. Fall back to the temple steps, he shouted to Aelith and the warriors behind her. We need to bottleneck them. Aelith nodded, leading her fighters back toward the towering entrance of the temple. It was the only place they could make a stand. But just as they reached the steps, Daniel's wrist device flashed red. New energy signature detected. His stomach dropped. No, 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 no. He turned his gaze to the sky. A massive raider warship was descending, its dark hull glowing with an ominous red light. They weren't just here to conquer anymore. They were here to end this. The ultimate betrayal. Inside the temple, the remaining Vaylari council members gathered in what was left of their sacred chamber. The battle raged outside, shaking the marble walls. High Priestess Soraya's second-in-command, a frail elder named Valen, turned to the others. This is our fault. We allowed this to happen. One of the younger priests clenched his fists. The girl, Aelith, she defied us. She brought war to Xura. No, Valen whispered. We brought war to ourselves, by thinking we could ignore it. The doors burst open. A tall, armored figure stepped inside, the raider warlord himself. His dark cloak flowed behind him, his reptilian eyes gleaming. The deal was simple, he growled. Surrender your people. Keep your city. The council members shivered. Soraya had made the deal in secret. She had promised them submission to save their culture. But Aelith had ruined everything. The warlord stepped closer. And now, you will burn with them. Before the council could react, the warlord raised his gauntlet. A single pulse of dark energy erupted, and the council chamber was reduced to dust. The choice that changed everything. Aelith saw the explosion from the temple steps. Her heart stopped. The council, the elders, gone. Her whole life, she had followed them. She had believed in them. And now, they had chosen surrender, and they had been erased. Daniel grabbed her arm. Aelith, we don't have time to mourn. That warship is preparing to fire. We have to take it down. Aelith's mind raced. How? Daniel gestured to the fallen raiders. They came in on dropships. That means they have shuttles nearby. If we can get aboard their mothership. Aelith understood instantly. Her hands stopped shaking. She turned to the remaining Vaylari warriors. We end this. Now. The raid on the raider warship. The plan was insane. A handful of Vaylari warriors and one human against an entire warship. But insanity was the only chance they had left. Daniel and Aelith led a stealth attack, sneaking aboard one of the raider shuttles left behind in the city ruins. With a stolen access code from a dead commander, they hacked their way inside the mothership. What they found inside made Aelith's stomach twist. Rows and rows of cages. Not just Vaylari. other species, other civilizations that had once thought they were safe. Daniel's face darkened. This is what happens when you think peace will protect you. Elith turned away, her jaw clenched. No more. She gripped the stolen raider blade, its dark metal humming in her hand. She would not just fight. She would destroy them. The final confrontation. They fought their way through the corridors, slicing through raider forces with deadly precision. Elith moved like a shadow, no longer hesitating, no longer questioning. This was her purpose now. Finally, they reached the command center. The warlord stood waiting. "You have already lost," he said, voice low and confident. "Surrender, and I will let you live." Elith raised her blade. "I do not believe in surrender anymore." The warlord lunged at her. The fight was brutal, fast, deadly. Daniel fought beside her, his rifle blasting away enemy guards. But the warlord was stronger, faster, relentless. Elith's mind raced. She couldn't overpower him, but she could outthink him. She feinted left, then spun low, her blade slicing across the warlord's exposed side. He roared in pain. Daniel fired a final pulse shot, right into the warlord's chest. The warlord fell to his knees. Elith stepped closer. "This is for my people." She drove the blade forward. The warlord collapsed. The ship shook violently. Daniel checked the control panel. "You just killed their leader. The fleet is breaking apart." Elith let out a slow breath. "Then we've won." The end of Hyora's silence. The raiders retreated. Without their warlord, they had no direction, no command. They abandoned Ciara, leaving only ruin behind. But Ciara had changed. The Velari were no longer untouched, no longer innocent. But they were alive. Elith stood at the temple steps, looking over the survivors. She had fought. She had killed. And yet, she had no regrets. Daniel stepped beside her. "What now?" Elith's silver eyes burned with purpose. "We rebuild." And for the first time in history, Ciara prepared for war. A new path, together. The war was over. Or at least, the first battle was. The sky above Ciara was clearing, the thick black smoke from burning raider ships finally thinning into the cool night air. The golden rivers still flowed, the twin moons still shone, but nothing about this world was the same anymore. It had been touched by war. The Velari had fought, and they had won. Elith stood at the edge of the ruined temple, overlooking the shattered city of Lurvelen. The once perfect marble streets were cracked, littered with debris from the battle. The air, once filled with the soothing songs of her people, was now thick with the sounds of rebuilding. Wounded warriors leaned against the temple steps, whispering to one another. Elders, once too afraid to fight, now worked alongside the young to repair what had been lost. A civilization that had once clung to isolation now stood united. Yet, in all this, Elith felt a strange emptiness inside her. The life she had known was gone, and she wasn't sure if she mourned it. The weight of leadership. Daniel Kane stepped beside her, his arms crossed as he surveyed the scene. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood, but he didn't seem to care. "Your people are fast learners," he said. "Most civilizations would have been wiped out after something like this." Elith exhaled. Most civilizations knew how to fight before they were invaded. Daniel shrugged. Maybe. But most civilizations didn't win their first war, either. Elith turned to him, something flickering in her silver eyes. "Did we win?" Daniel hesitated. He had seen too much war to call anything a true victory. "You survived," he said simply. Elith glanced at the broken city, at the mourning families, at the scars that would never truly heal. "Yes," she murmured, "we survived. But at what cost? The council is no more." The Velari High Council was gone. Some had died when the raider warlord destroyed their chambers. The few that survived had fallen into hiding, unable to face the truth of what had happened. They had betrayed their people. And now, Shiera had no leaders. A group of warriors and healers gathered near the temple steps, their voices hushed, uncertain. They whispered to one another, casting glances at Elith. Daniel noticed. "They're waiting for you." Elith blinked. "For me?" Daniel nodded. "Your people aren't looking for the old leaders anymore. They're looking at the one who actually saved them." A chill ran through her. She had never wanted this. Her whole life, she had been taught to follow, to obey the wisdom of the elders, to submit to the will of the council. But the council had abandoned them. And she had defied everything she had been raised to believe. Yet here they were. And now, they looked to her. One of the surviving elders stepped forward, his robes still torn from battle. "Elith," he said, bowing his head slightly, "you are the one who led us when no one else did. You must lead us now." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elith felt a tightness in her chest. "I am not a leader," she said quietly. The elder's gaze was calm, unwavering. "You are now." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell them to look elsewhere, to find someone else to carry this burden. But she knew the truth. No one else would. And she could not abandon them. Not now. Slowly, she straightened, her silver eyes hardening with quiet resolve. If she must lead, she would lead. But she would not lead them back into the past. She would lead them into the future, a new way forward. The next morning, Elith stood before the gathered survivors, standing on the same temple steps where the council had once spoken. She took a breath. We were told that to be untouched meant to be safe. Silence. She lifted her gaze. That was a lie. A ripple went through the crowd. The raiders came whether we fought or not. Our peace did not protect us. Our purity did not save us. She glanced at Daniel, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her with quiet approval. "We are not untouched anymore," Elith continued. "We are changed, and we will never go back to what we were." Some of the older Valeri shifted uncomfortably, but the younger warriors nodded. Daniel smirked. "They're ready." Elith took another breath, feeling the weight of her next words. "We will not wait for another invasion." The crowd stiffened. "We will prepare." Murmurs of uncertainty spread through the people. But Elith's voice was unwavering. "We will train," she said. "We will build defenses. We will never be unprepared again." The murmurs changed. Now, there was agreement. Elith's grip on the railing tightened. She had spoken the truth, and they had accepted it. But she wasn't done. "We have a choice. We can hide again, and pretend that this will never happen, or we can become something stronger." She raised her chin. "I choose strength." And one by one, they all did too. Daniel's departure. Later that evening, Daniel found Elith at the edge of the ruins, staring at the horizon. He approached quietly. "You did good." She didn't turn. "I did what had to be done." Daniel exhaled. He had seen leaders born in moments like this before. Some had crumbled under the weight of it. Others had become legends. He had a feeling Elith would be the latter. She finally turned to face him. "You're leaving." Daniel nodded. "I can't stay. My ship's been repaired, and there are other battles out there." Elith studied him for a long moment. "Then why do I feel like this is goodbye?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled. A rare, real smile. "Because you've got your own fight now." Elith looked down, then stepped forward. She reached out and took his hand. Daniel tensed for a moment, then relaxed. "Be careful out there, human," she murmured. Daniel smirked. "You too, priestess." Then, with one final nod, he turned and walked toward his ship. Elith watched as the vessel rose into the sky, disappearing into the stars. She knew she would see him again. But for now, she had a world to rebuild. And for the first time, she was not afraid. Because she was not untouched anymore. She was something else. Something stronger.